is I believe to be a really good leader, an executive, an entrepreneur, is that we are taught not to let a lot of people into that place because it's risky and it's dangerous. And so the thing that we're taught not to do in business is different than what we're taught to do in recovery.
I'm here with Jason Van Ruler. Jason, this has been almost a year, unbeknownst to you, it's almost been a year in the making. I can't remember if it was your book or if it might have just been a podcast I heard you on, but I knew that you understood the struggles of the high achiever and the entrepreneur within recovery, especially sex and porn addiction. Not just what goes into accepting and understanding how and why this is going on for you, but also applying recovery practices and recovery principles to kind of the unique life of a high achiever and entrepreneur. Because the fact of the matter is they are different. And I know it's very common to say, especially within the therapy world, that you're not special, you're not different, right? And there is a barrier there to recovery when you do think you're special and you do think you're different. So there is merit to understanding that psychologically and biologically, you are actually not that different than everybody else who's going through this. However, that does not mean that you don't operate in a society that has demands of you interpersonally, interfamilial, even belonging to a certain social status, and that has practices that culturally have become, what a successful male would do. All of these things are real. They're very real. And I would argue even for the high achiever and entrepreneur, they're more than just real. I mean, it feels almost as if we messed with any of those, that it would affect my life. It would affect my financial security. And, for a lot of the men in my groups, there's a lot of fear of, hey, I actually really like my life. I like the way things are. I don't really want that much to change. I just want to remove this little sexual piece. The issue is, and every guy in my group knows this problem's bigger than you initially realize. I think they come into it like an entrepreneur and they think, hey, I'm going to come in, I'm going to change this little piece. I'm going to remove this behavior will stop, and then we will continue on forward. And it'll be like nothing ever happened. Well, it starts to realize with each therapy visit, each book you read, each podcast you listen to, it's like, okay, shoot, the cause of this actually has its hands and fingers into a lot of areas of my life and my upbringing. And so I love this conversation because what you and I are going to discuss here is, because you and I share the same population, what are these nuances? What do we see? And I'm hoping with the time that we have available, I would love this fit like 18 to 20 like light bulb moments, big power punches in for these guys so they can really wrap their heads around the uniqueness that their recovery approach is going to have to entail. So take it away. I would love for you to kind of, let's start with your circles, because I think that's a great way to kind of tee up this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, and what I might even just say first is just thanks for having me on. I'm honored to be on. And I think, you might not be special, but your circumstances are. And so that's something I say to my clients all the time is we have to recognize kind of the dichotomy of that place that we live, which is that we are all human and we share a lot of things, but our circumstances can be different. Mm-hmm. And to your point, it's like this does run deeper than we think. We kind of say like a lot of people who are high performers and achievers, they're probably very solution focused, where they just say, okay, here's an issue. Let's pluck that issue out. We'll remove it. We'll move on. And then we begin to find, well, actually this runs deeper. I have been blessed with skin that allows me to be either sunburnt or pasty white all the time. And so I get to go to the dermatologist. And I remember I went once and there was a mole and they said, hey, we think this is like cancerous. I'm like, okay, well, do you like freeze it off or what do you do? And they're like, well, maybe. And then they kind of cut into it. And they're like, well, it's deeper than we think. And so they end up cutting like 2 inches into my shoulder. And they're like, hey, I think we got it, but it was deeper than we thought. And by the way, I hope you're cool never taking your shirt off in the sun again. And I'm like, well, I thought I was coming in to have a mole removed. And now I'm leaving with a changed life. And I just feel like that's what we're talking about here.
Oh, bro, that couldn't be a more accurate description, right? It's like first like, hey, no, I don't want, the way I always describe it is it's like, we don't want to accept that this is a problem, because it's more than just the betrayal, the discovery, or what we did in the last couple months. Accepting that this is actually problematic for most men actually would indicate that there's a lot of what you did that was compulsive, that was not normal. It was, you were not one of the guys. Like it's actually not a normal practice to give money to a woman and in exchange for sex. That's actually not a normal practice. But I think that's the challenge. Is it's like we want it to be, hey, freeze this thing off in just a quick little outpatient visit.
I don't want to think about it every time I go to the beach. That's not, I didn't know that's what I was signing up for.
Right.
You know, I just got back from a vacation to Florida, and like, man, I had to think about that every day.
Right.
I didn't know that's what that was going to entail. And so I think it's just sort of like it puts it into perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we learn to live with that in a way that actually supports the lifestyle we have? Because you said,
I would love to, before we go in, just because I think this would be great to slap in the middle. I know this is a big ask of you, but can we touch on some of these things that are deeper, just as like a little like preview, and then we can maybe talk about hopefully all of them, but as many of them as we can later. What I mean by that is, do you know what empathy actually is? I mean, intellectually, you heard about it in a book, but do you value it? I know that was a big issue for me. Is I didn't want empathy, was the story I told myself. The truth is I didn't understand it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. What are some of these like issues, just so that we can help some of the listeners understand, what are some of these deeper issues at a high level, and then hopefully we can zoom in later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues that we face is it's kind of like how I approach the mole. Hey, this is a problem. Can you just burn it off or what? Like, I don't know. I'm going to throw some money at it. And can you just take care of it? Here's the deal, my friend. Most of us were raised that way, right? We were raised in a place where we said, hey, I've got big feelings, or I've got, this problem. And we were just told like, hey, could you just figure that out on your own? Mm-hmm. Could you just take care of that in the quickest way possible so as not to bother me? Mm-hmm. And then we can move forward. Mm-hmm. And so the deeper issue is that we take this approach to problems and we struggle with empathy because we didn't get it. Mm-hmm. We can't give others the gift we didn't get. And so we find ourselves in a position where we build a life that doesn't require it. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it does. Mm-hmm. And so we don't know how to fix the problem because it's always been the problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think this is obviously a huge thing, but the way I have kind of brought it down into one word, at least that I see with high performers, high achievers, entrepreneurs, is they've dehumanized themselves. And a lot of times this happened very, very early. And this was a combination of, who knows, parents, things they saw on television, but a lot of high performers turned themselves into achieving machines. They became, by the time they were 12, it was like, okay, I am going to do these things, and living this way I will achieve the maximum amount of achievements. And the reason I call it dehumanization is, in order to live that way, which is not how humans are designed to live, chase goal after goal after goal after goal. They learn to do things like you said, they learn to stop feeling. They learn to stop putting themselves out there, maybe with others, because the ramification of the relationship going sideways, it hurts, it's distracting. So all these little micro moments happen, and in order to become a achievement machine, these things, if that's your objective, these things have to be removed from your life, according to this person's realm of understanding. The sad part, though, is, at least the way I see it, when you remove your humanity, and by humanity I mean your motivations, your desires, your needs, how you feel about what's going on. I can't tell you how many high performers have grown to hate their businesses, and these things, and they just choose to, hey, I can't hate this thing because of blank and blank and blank reason. Without this, it's a huge hole in my identity because this is my most profitable business. So without this, I would just have my other businesses. But the point is, every time you keep making excuses to discount your humanity, that's actually really scary when we think about it, because the moment that you have dehumanized yourself, kind of anything goes at that point in time, because humans are the ones that care about their legacy. Humans are the ones that care about integrity. Humans care about other humans. So if you have stripped away your own humanity, not only does it allow you to treat yourself like a doing and accomplishing machine, but I think the scary piece is you can now view material and treat other people less human in the same way that you were just talking about with empathy. You can't give something you don't have. And so I think the big issue is that's what's underneath them all is dishonoring just humanity in general. The sex addiction is just kind of on the top, but I mean, it's just, when you have really devalued what's going on in exchange for accomplishments, goals, achievements, I haven't read a religious book or a biology book that speaks about any of that stuff being a part of the human plan and leading to any sort of fulfillment. But before we go any further, let's just start with your circles, because I think it's a great way for people to wrap their head around recovery. I think it's a very unique approach, because recovery, a lot of times people think recovery is stopping the behavior, but it's actually a lot bigger than that. So take it away, please.
Yeah. Well, recovery, I mean, it's about understanding what function that the acting out had in the first place, right? Because it was meeting a need. And I've never met anybody who wasn't trying to meet a legitimate need. Now, they may be doing it in an incredibly inefficient and painful way, but they're trying to meet a need, right? So if you think about, if you're a deep sea diver, you need an oxygen tank. Because that's what helps you go down there in the place where we don't know much about, right? And so that's addiction for us, is that's our oxygen tank. Now, are there limitations? Could it blow up and kill you? Yeah, all those things are true, but we've been equipped with, this is how I cope. And so one of the first things we need to do, and you kind of referenced it, is in recovery, we have to figure out kind of what is reasonable and what life we're trying to build. But the only way we really know is to tell somebody. I think we've all had that experience where we've grown up and we met a good friend or we've dated someone and we've learned that something we thought was normal as a kid is maybe not so normal. Right. And we learn that because we've been vulnerable with someone enough to tell them what we experienced. Right. So I thought, we grew up poor. And so I thought, like, if you had a hamburger helper on a Tuesday night, like, that was a pretty darn good night. Right. We were living. I met my wife, who comes from a ranching family, and they eat steak every night. And she's like, you guys are poor. And I didn't know we were that poor until I met you. Right. And so we have to be in community with others to learn who we are and what makes sense. And so what I talk to people about is vulnerability. And what I want you to think of is, just think of a bullseye. And in the middle of the bullseye would be the place where you are the most vulnerable. And this means that we really tell the truth, right? We don't tell the PR version of the story. We tell the actual story. And I want you to think about how many people are in that circle with you. And a lot of times the people that I work with would say maybe one, maybe two. And a lot of times their spouse isn't even in that place. And then I want you to imagine the rest of the bullseye in the rings going out, right? So on the outermost part of the bullseye are the people with the least knowledge about who you really are. And think about, if you had to segment people in your life on that scale, where are most people going to end up? And what I find over and over again with leaders struggling with addiction is that there aren't many people that are in the innermost circles. And part of the reason is I believe, to be a really good leader, an executive, an entrepreneur, is that we are taught not to let a lot of people into that place because it's risky and it's dangerous. And so the thing that we're taught not to do in business is different than what we're taught to do in recovery.
You, one thing that I have noticed too is that high achievers have fewer guides. And if you think about a guide, right, you guys have heard the phrase, right? You have to meet people where they are. Well, it's really difficult when you're in the top 2% or even top 1%. There is only, there's a much smaller group of people who are going to really be able to meet you where you are, because they haven't lived the life as the 1%. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges too, is I think a lot of, especially the guys that we work with, they want connections. They want to have more friends. They would love to throw more people in that circle. I think it's challenging though, because when we're omitting that wavelength, for lack of a better word, we're wanting to get it back, and it is harder to get back when you're in that top 2%. You and I were talking about this offline. We like who we like, and there's just a limit there. And so I think too, when you're trying to throw people in those circles, even now, deep into my recovery, I'm still trying to throw as many people into those circles as you can. And I'll tell you right now, Jason, there's not as many people in there, even doing this for all this time. There's still not that many folks in there, Jason.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sorry for that. But what I'll tell you is that it's a smaller pool, right? When you're in this position, the pool is smaller. We have to qualify people, and it takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for people in this place is that it's going to take you longer to get that,
mm-hmm. because
you have more to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be a good steward of your resources. And if you've got a lot of resources, you have to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, you don't let somebody into the innermost circle overnight. Like, that's just not how that works unless you want to get hurt. And so it's going to take a bit.
And I love that you said that, because it's my wife actually even said this to me way early on in my recovery. I was going to 12-step, and I was just like, I'm just not connecting there. And you know what she told me? And it shocked me, especially as a freshly betrayed person. She said, "Don't go." And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, well, the whole point's connection. There's no therapist there. There's no crosstalk. So it's like, you're either connecting or not. And if you're not connecting, don't go. And I was like, okay. And then she said, but find a replacement.
Yeah.
Right. Find a men's group. She's like, they don't even have to be sex addicts, but you need, she's a smart woman. So she understood the point was to enjoy being around these people and let them into my life. And so I like that you said that. There's a wonderful book I love called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. And he has this wonderful quote that he just says by Oliver Berkman. He says it over and over and over again. Some things just take the time they take. And I never let that in until I read that book. But that's what you're talking about here but the thing I want to highlight is have a plan, though, because just saying, oh, it's hard, and not making an effort to try to add people, to try to, test people out, you have to take risks. You got to try, throw something out there and see what happens. You might be surprised. They might actually be somebody who you want in the circle, and you won't know until you test that water. Jason, I'm going to drop the one on you that I've been waiting for the whole year. And I don't get to drop this on a lot of folks because I don't want to offend them by accident. But I'm not worried about that with you. So I'm just going to do it. Man, it's frustrating 4, 6, 8 months in when you go into therapy and, okay, let's say you haven't necessarily acted on anything, but it's very much a thing that could be acted on. It's not gone really much of anywhere since discovery. The grief phase has weared off. It's like, hey, there's these 3 things. One's very, very tempting. I've actually had some incidences, and I've had to tell my wife, blah, blah, blah. So this person comes in. It's very frustrating for them in that situation that I just described, when the response is, well, did you call Dave? And it's like, yeah, okay, yes, I called Dave, but Dave's, yes, Dave's like one of the few guys with long sobriety, but like, then again, Dave was just pausing rated R, he's 62, he's pausing rated R movies on the boob scenes. And I've slept with like 82 sex workers, and I've done way more. And so, but again, that's the answer seems to be, well, did you call Dave? Have you been calling Dave? Are you going to the, and again, that the first few times it's like, okay, I'll try that. But I'm telling you, Jason, it gets a little obnoxious when your marriage and your kids and everything is on the line. And the only response is, are you calling your sponsor? Are you calling your sponsor? And then when I come in at appointments, all we're talking about is my childhood trauma, which I understand the importance of, but I'm freaking out here because I'm not going to see you again until next week. And all you keep telling me to do is call Dave, and I'm calling Dave, and I'm still doing this stuff. So my point is, again, I'm not trying to belittle or
Oh, I'm
speak,
offended. I'm
but
very offended right
it's
now.
a very
So luckily
frustrating
for you,
thing.
I know a bunch of therapists. I can process my emotions, but I am very offended right now.
So do you get what I'm saying? It's just like, if you tell me to call Dave one more time and I have to wait a full week to come back and talk about that one thing that happened when I was 12, it's like, can we come up with another freaking plan here so I can stay married? And then we can talk about that thing when I was 14 for 5 years. I'll entertain that. But the frustration out of the gates is, and so many guys feel this way because there's so much to lose. And it seems like the solutions are, to be honest, very unlike a lot of what we do as an entrepreneur. It's like, that's your grand plan, is for me to call this guy. It's like, oh my gosh. And I think at that moment, I've seen a lot of guys start to lose a lot of steam after that happens.
Yeah, and rightfully so. So, I mean, here's what I would say to that. Who are you going to? Can I get their name and I'll give them a call? To me, that's just not helpful. So I'm a really big believer in that we do what's helpful and what works. Mm-hmm. And so when I hear that, I go, oh man, that would never be my response, is to just say to you, it'd be great as if you were a different person. That never solves anybody's problem, right? So if you're like, hey, I acted out and I've always struggled letting people in and being vulnerable, what should I do? And then I'm like, just pretend you're a different person. Like, never works, never going to work. Right. So I think the challenge is like, you need to find someone who actually helps you, not just tells you what to do that you're not doing. Mm-hmm. And there is a difference. And so I think, the thing about that is, if you continually hear a message that isn't working for you, then you need to confront who you're talking to and just say like, hey, I noticed like your kind of stock answer isn't actually helpful for me. And so do you have a different one, or do I need to talk to somebody different? And then just from more of like a treatment perspective, my answer to that is not to call the person, because plenty of people call people and still act out, right? I mean, if that worked, everybody would do it and no one would struggle.
A lot of people get out of 8 weeks in a rehab facility and act out the next day too. So.
Well, because you waited that long. I mean, why not? So here's my question to the person who says what you said. I say to you, do you know what need you have that's not being met? Mm-hmm. And if you don't, let's spend some time figuring that out, because that is what you're trying to do, is you're trying to meet a need in an unhealthy way. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think Dave knows what your need is unless that's something you shared with him. I think you do. And if you don't, we should learn. Mm-hmm. But that's our primary goal. Mm-hmm. If we don't know that in recovery, we're going to continue to fail.
I would love to hear what you do, because you work with men. For those people who don't know Jason and how he works, you work with couples. I think you do as well, don't you? Yep. Couples and men in a kind of unique way. It's almost rather than this, and I so appreciate it, rather than this like slog of like, okay, I just got caught and then I'm going to sign up for therapy every 3 weeks for an hour and just pray to God that we're still married. You have kind of a bit of a different approach. I would love for you to explain some of that, I guess, in a nutshell to us, because I think a lot of the unique listeners in my group, they want a plan. They've always had a plan. They love plans. They want to know the plan. They want to know why it works. They want to have a backup plan. They want to know that when they deviate from the plan, that their plan can deviate. These are things that these guys want to know. And I think that the whole let's fix your childhood trauma thing is quite frustrating, because as they're uncovering it, they're realizing, wow, this could take me potentially 8 or 9 years to really discover what connection is, to value integrity, to learn what empathy is and value it and want to give it to people. I mean, these are things that if they weren't modeled correctly to you, they can take 5, 8, 10 years to learn. I'm right in that right now. I'm still trying to figure out what empathy even is, rather than just saying the statements that must be hard for you. What is empathy? I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it, because I had no empathy in my life growing up. But I would love for you to talk about, like, what is this roadmap? What is this plan? I mean, they call you, life's exploding in front of their eyes. They're married to the woman of their dreams. They have these beautiful kids. Life's perfect. I need the most efficient plan and support right now, because as you and I both know, there is an expiration date on the marriage. And so, we got to kind of get going with it. Talk to us about the plan as best you can. I know it's a loaded question and it's big, but how are we going to do this? How are you going to give me the confidence and my spouse the confidence that this is going to go away and that we have our hand on top of the darn thing?
Yeah. And that's, everybody takes a different approach. My approach is just based on the training that I've done and the type of group that I work with. Here's what I know. Doing therapy hour by hour every 3 weeks is death by 1,000 paper cuts. And it's also not really effective. And so where I've come to be at in my career is that I get a phone call and I am either flown to someone somewhere or they fly to me. Mm-hmm. And then we typically spend 2 days together, and those are full days. Mm-hmm. And the goal of those days that we spend is that we have a 3-part process. And process number one, part number one is really understanding your origin story. How did you end up the way you are today? And how do we change how we look at that? Right? Mm-hmm. Because what we ultimately find is that we have some needs that weren't met, and we have some lies that we believe about how the world works that aren't serving us. We then move into the second part, which is owning the present. Mm-hmm. So if that's where I came from, where am I today? Let's talk about how it's blowing up, what's actually happening with that, the extent of it, and be honest, right? I mean, sometimes we do this thing where we try to minimize it, but let's not do that. Let's just tell the truth. And then the last part is vision for the future. And in the vision for the future, it kind of depends on the person and where they're at and sort of, what their life all entails. But the gist of it is we do what's called a 1-3-5 plan. And so the 1 is sobriety, sustainable sobriety. So that's our one main goal. Our 3 pillars to that goal are usually, what do we do as far as sobriety is concerned? What do we do personally? And what do we do relationally? And what are 5 tasks under each of those 3 things? So we put that together, and then you leave. Now, sometimes in addition to doing that, I'll work with a PR firm, and we'll get really specific about what the story is going to be, about what it is that we're doing. And then we have the plan put together, and then we develop a board of directors. Mm-hmm. And everybody needs a personal board of directors. It's not just for business. And so we say, who is going to be on your board of directors for now? And if we don't know, who should we recruit? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then we go into, are you following your plan?
Mm-hmm. I like that. You said what I never want to say, because a lot of my friends are very talented in this space. But again, I think it is worth saying, because the people listening to this, there's a lot on the line, and that's why I upset a lot of people, Jason, by accident. I don't mean to. It's just, I just can't, I don't feel right not saying something that I believe in, and walking this walk. There was value to, I'm still, to this day, I'm still seeing, I'm not seeing a CSAT currently. Well, that's not true. We're seeing a couple of CSAT currently. But I'm seeing a somatic experiencing therapist, and also more of a kind of psychoanalytic guy approach. So I'm not taking away, I'm probably going to do that for the rest of my life. I don't see why not. But in crisis mode, I appreciate you saying it, because it's hard to say and it's not popular, which is, going to therapy, I would say even weekly. It's just not a great plan when it comes to immediate damage control change, because there's that exchange that occurs in that room during the hour is very important. There's a lot of gold that comes out of that, and the gold needs to be plucked out. It needs to be sorted. It needs to be processed. And, that could take 2 months, and that's a very critical piece to recovery. In no way am I diminishing the value there. But again, what I was talking about was exactly what you spoke to, which is like, what are we going to do now? Because that's, if the divorce is going to happen, it's going to happen. It's going to happen in these first 6 months. That's when it's going to happen. It's going to be, no, I'm not sure. I'm out of here. And then, obviously it's going to happen again if you, if you ask for I always say they'll give you a second chance. They ain't going to give you a third. That's where I've seen a lot of guys fall off. They go to ask for the third. That's a tough ask. That's a big ask. So I appreciate you going there.
You have to, I think you have to earn your seat at the table.
Yes.
in recovery in the relationship. And the way you earn your seat at the table is you have a plan that you're following. And so a lot of guys mess up because they simply act on the feeling.
Yeah.
Hey, I really want to make it work. Will you give me another chance?
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, yeah, sure, I'll give you another chance. What does that mean? And you go, oh, I don't know. I haven't thought that far yet. I just really want another chance. And by the way, would you mind trusting me? Because that would be awesome too, right? And so we need the plan.
I know there's gonna be some questions if I don't ask you, because I've done this long enough and I know when someone says something and it's not completely clear. Speak just quickly on the board of directors, just so everybody listening understands what that means when it comes to recovery.
Yep, we need certain people to play certain roles in our life to make us better. And so some of those people might help us with sobriety, with our addiction. They might help us be better fathers. They might help us be better husbands. But we need to recruit a group of people intentionally that will help us to get to the place we want to go. If we knew how to get to the place we want to go on our own, we would have already been there. Mm-hmm. So we're going to need some help. And so ideally what we want to find is some people who are doing those things well and recruit those people into a lasting relationship. Mm-hmm. Whereby they teach you some of those things. Mm-hmm. If you said to me right now, hey, Jason, let's say you have a problem at home. I've got 3 kids. What do? I'm going to tell you the first person I'll call. I got a guy for that. Mm-hmm. And that guy's my friend and it's reciprocal, but I would call that guy. I'm in my 40s. He's in his 60s. And I'd say, hey, Tom, what do I do? Mm-hmm. And he'd say, well, this is easy. Do this. Mm-hmm. And I'd go, cool. I wouldn't have known that otherwise. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the biggest missing pieces, is to have that trusted group of advisors in your personal life. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons the addiction's thriving, is because you don't.
Yes. And it's that piece I love. So to me, this is kind of a nice transition into what we were talking about, you and I, offline, which was connection. We know there's all these cool studies, and if you talk to addicts, I will tell you right now, I remember the first time I heard it, when everyone's like, oh, connection's going to be, by a landslide, will be the best thing for your recovery. And I remember hearing it and I'm just like, yeah, whatever, like maybe for somebody else, but like, I don't see why that would be beneficial. Well, I did not do a good job of that in the first 8 months. And I will tell you, the second I did, it made the biggest difference in my recovery. It was that day that I felt like I started to actually have my hand on the thing, rather than it having my hand on me and having to do a dance. Connection's a lot harder than just going to a 12-step meeting, popping on a Zoom call, making a phone call here and there, sending a text here and there. And it's commonly discussed within recovery that it is those things. But it's hilarious that it's discussed that way, because I think the people, the therapists, if anyone on this planet knows the recipe that actually is involved in connection and intimacy, it's therapists. And so it's kind of interesting to me when they give this, in my opinion, kind of half-assed advice of, hey, go do these things because you need connection. It's funny because when I listen to that, it's like, I've never interacted in that way with someone and ever connected with people doing those series of practices. It's just that, to me, that's not how connection is really formed. You and I were speaking to this. What do we do about that piece? Because it is, I wholeheartedly agree that when you connect with addicts who you respect and admire, who you actually connect with, who you look forward to seeing, who you look forward to calling, that's the recipe. But I would love for you to speak to that, because I know you work with these people. This is probably, especially for high achievers, I would say this is probably the hardest puzzle piece to fit in.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is that the people who are really successful in networking and working with people have the most difficult time doing this because they feel like it's different. It's not different, right? It's sort of like, here's what I'll tell you. Before becoming a therapist, I owned a recruiting firm. And what I learned in there is that if you want to do sales well and have a lot of relationships, you need a big funnel. And you need to stay in touch, and you need to have shared interests, and you need to learn about them and take an interest. And hey, it's weird. Connection works the same. Okay. And so what I tell a lot of people is, if you are calling one person trying to be their friend, you're going to have a bad time. It's just going to be hard. And so we have to look at this a little bit more strategically and just say, not everybody is going to be your best friend. And some people will be your best friend for a couple of months and it'll change. So where I start with this is you have to do all the same things you have to do in business. You have to find common ground. You have to incrementally work towards that. Like all of that needs to happen for that connection to be made. And trying to rush that process or trying to change, it's not going to give you any more success.
Yeah, one of my mentors, that's one thing he always said: the rules of relationships are never suspended. It doesn't matter in what container and what situation. The rules of relationships,
I like that.
They stay where they are every time. It's anybody who's been to a 12-step meeting. I remember just because of my lifestyle, I've been to probably 40 different meetings, maybe more, and I'm always swarmed and bombarded at, hey, can I have your number? And dude, I was on the leg press and I got a call from a guy who I don't even remember his name. The only reason I knew his name was it was saved in my phone. I'm on the leg press and he's like, hey man, I just looked at some, I'm just like, hey, I'm like, I don't even know what to say to the guy. I think you're that one with the beard, but I don't really know. And so, but to that point, I think that's that robotic process. And Jason, I think you hit the nail on the head. I've never heard somebody say that. It's people think it's different because this is addiction. It's no different. It's exactly like if you were courting a referral partner who has a bunch of clients that they could send you. It's the same exact principle. Let's see if there's something in common. Let's see if we like each other. Do you want me to call you? Do I want to call you? Like, let's test all of this out. But again, Jason, I don't want to minimize this. This is hard. This was the hardest piece for me to find in my recovery. It was without question the hardest thing to do, especially as somebody who likes to go deep. I like to have intellectual conversations. It was very challenging to find somebody who I could have those enjoyable conversations with to the point where I wanted to call them. And it took a long time to find somebody that I wanted to call. And to me, I think if the phone's heavy and you don't want to call, that's tough. That's really tough for this.
And maybe that's the season you're in where that's all you have. But we keep looking for the next person, right? Like and so we say, what I would just say to you is like, are we having good enough relationships?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be perfect, but is it good enough? And if it's not good enough, how do we move towards good enough with somebody else? And I think really, as you develop this, and if you think about it, like in business and relationship building, I always say you first. So if you want a more vulnerable and deep relationship, you first.
Yeah,
like you lead and role model for them what you want and see if they show up in return.
I like that. You said one other thing as the kind of the final part of your plan when you're working with somebody, and I loved it because I agree, and this is our chosen strategy that we use as a group. God's not enough to keep you sober. Your wife's not enough to keep you sober. Clearly, your kids aren't enough to keep you sober. It's common belief that God or your wife or your kids are going to be enough, and that isn't the case. And so the last piece that you said, which I really enjoyed, was legacy. What I find with high achievers and entrepreneurs is one thing that matters quite a bit to them is the impact and ramifications that they had on this planet and on their family. To me, it's the one thing I've seen that really can reframe all of it. I wanted to kind of speak to, you talked about, I can't remember what you called the last section there, but you talked about, where are we going with this? And that's, to me, without that, it's kind of funny to me that anyone can recover, because I think when legacy is in mind, to me, it's this cool little hack, Jason, that it reframes so many things. Because when we're starting to think about, hey, as my days are over here and every day that I lived, that's how legacy is formed. Everyone thinks about it like that day that you die. The legacy is actually formed today. It's the cumulative of the thousands of days added up together that leaves the legacy. But I think it's this really neat hack of, I think when you look at the behaviors in isolation, it can actually be very difficult to know what to do with them. And at times, I've even seen some men look at it and say, man, that is so exciting. That feels so good. It's so hard for me to say, oh, I want that out of my life, because it's like those experiences were like peak experiences. And so I think when we go at it head on, it can be very, very difficult. But I think when you use legacy and the consequences of someone like you doing what you're doing here, and what that ripple effect has on other young men, on women, I think when we add that piece, it's that, at least in our program, it's that reframe that actually makes all the other recovery work become easier, because then the objective is, that's the legacy I want. I don't want one riddled with porn and sex workers and objectifying women, and creating essentially an unsafe environment for my wife and my daughters to exist in, because they can't just go to the gym and wear something fashionable without being turned into some sort of pleasure object for the men who are there. Talk to us about that last piece. I can't remember what you called it, but what's your approach there? How do you get them to future plan and then use that data to modify their behaviors today?
Yeah, well, as you said, I mean, you need a vision for the future. If you don't have a vision, or it's unclear, it's hard to work for it.
Yep.
Right. And in the same way, like you wouldn't start a business if you had no vision for where you wanted it to go. I'd never invest in your business if you approached me and said, I've got an idea. It's just an idea. I don't have a vision for it, but like, would you give me some money? I'd say, no, I wouldn't actually give you any money for that. And maybe you shouldn't do it. And so one of the things we have to talk about is just like, what is our vision for the future? Because with a vision, the small steps, they make sense, and they're worthwhile. We did this beautiful brick patio at our house, and I think there's something like 2,000 bricks out there. And that's a lot of bricks to put down, but here's the thing. I really love the vision of how it would look at the end. And so even though maybe brick number 50, I was kind of like, oh man, there's a lot more to go. I was sold on the vision. And that's really what we're trying to do. And then recognizing that we're going to continue to adjust that. Your vision today will be different than the vision you have in a year. And that's good. That's called growth. And so we want that, but you have to have the vision to kind of hang on to. And by the way, for whatever it's worth, your wife needs a vision too. If you are trying to sell your wife on the vision of how it is today is how it'll always be, good luck. Good luck staying married. Because what is there to hang on to? So if it's like, I think we'll toil away and struggle, and we'll just try to maintain where we're at today, and that's my vision for the future, I think no one's buying that. And so the couples that last are the ones that have a shared vision for the future and take the steps to get there.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. It really is. The only reason my wife and I were able to make it through this was a mutual understanding of, hey, if we could create this, would this be the best marriage that both of us have access to? Because that was the unique thing about my wife and I, young, there's nothing really bonding us together. She could leave whenever. We actually never got legally married. So I mean, she could literally just leave and never speak to me again, and there would be nothing wrong with it. Both of us wanted this marriage to be the best marriage that we had access to, because, for us, we don't like to settle for anything mediocre. And so, if it was going to be mediocre, then it would just be better for both of us just wash our hands and carry on. But the reason we're staying, though, even though things still aren't perfect, I mean, this is a long, janky, funky journey full of all sorts. A lot of our problems now have nothing to do with sexual compulsivity. They have to do now with just other aspects of life. But it's that shared legacy. What are we building? Where are we trying to go? And are we on the track to get there? That's the reason that we are being relational despite all of the trauma and the betrayal. And, I wish I could tell you that with all the therapy, I learned empathy. I understand what connection is. I don't go back to, childish adaptations. But I mean, that's no person can say that. And and
they didn't marry you to be someone different.
Yes.
So what I always tell people is, they don't want you to be a completely different person, otherwise they wouldn't have been with you.
Yes.
They want you to be mostly the same person, just someone who keeps their word.
Yes.
That's the difference.
I
And
love that.
so it's not, because I think sometimes we tell people like the goal is, if you don't like hockey, you'll love hockey. And if it's like, man, you are who you are. I want you to stay who you are. Just keep your word.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, everybody listening to this knows it's the deception that hurt the most.
Yeah.
Right. I'm living with someone that I don't necessarily that might lie to me. I mean, gosh, what a terrifying thing, right? So that's really the ask is, hey, be the guy I married, but stay that guy consistently and don't hide stuff from me, right?
Yeah.
Right? Jason, talk to us about how this works. So if somebody wanted to fly you out to them, how often do you do this? Is there a wait list? What do they need to do for this to happen if they were interested in having you come out?
Yeah, it's usually just a phone call or an email. My website's jasonvr.com, and then we kind of collect the details and see what makes the most sense. As probably anybody, I've got a pretty full schedule, but sometimes there's a crisis that requires me to change some things up. So I kind of acknowledge when I started in this field that that's how my life was going to work, and it works okay. So usually it's just an email, and then we kind of get clear on a phone call about what it is we're trying to do and what success would look like. I'm kind of like you. I'm committed to exceptional always. And so if I don't think I can be that person, I don't want you to waste your time and money. And so that's why the call helps.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. I do the same thing. No one's going to get into any of my groups unless I've spoken to you, because, especially with the mastermind effect, it's only as strong as the members there. And so we can't have people with any, if your commitment's not a 10 out of 10, you need to find a different group, or you need to reach back out to me when your commitment's back up there. Because again,
it's not a bad thing. It's just, something I learned in my own work is I'm not for everybody. And that's okay. And not everybody's for me.
And who are these people? Who are these people that are for you? For those listening, trying to determine, hey, this is a good fit. Give us a brief description of what a good fit is for working with you.
Yeah, I would say people who want to do the work and do it well in the most efficient way possible. That group of people who show up and they, I tailor this whole thing to people specifically, but the people who show up and they got the notebook and they're ready to do this stuff, like those are my people, because I know they'll do the work. I had a mentor that told me, whatever you pay to attend a workshop or conference, you need to have that in notes when you leave. And I want to work with the people who see the value in that.
Yeah, I like that. That. And you do work with couples. So if let's say that they're a couple years into this, they've done a lot of kind of the stuff that you and I have discussed. The marriage is still kind of not where it needs to be. Do you work with couples? I kind of remember that previously. Is it still something you do?
Yep. Most of my referrals are from either past clients or other therapists that say, hey, we're stuck. Can you help?
Yeah. Cool.
And that's kind of my sweet spot.
Yeah. Cool. I love that. Well, Jason, that's great. One more time, your website, and then also give us the name of the book so that people can find both of those things.
Yeah. Website is jasonvr.com. And then the book is called Get Past Your Past.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, thanks, brother. This did not disappoint. And I have a feeling that we'll probably do another one of these in the fall or something, because there's a lot of things that I didn't get to because you're too darn brilliant. You took me all sorts of different ways. And so I got a feeling there'll be a part 2 here in the future.
Oh, I would be honored. Keep me posted. I'd love it.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
All right, thanks.